Welcome everybody, welcome to Clay Art Centre. We're here tonight with Hayne Bayless and he's going to give us a demo tonight live from his studio. You should see three screens right at this moment, two from Hayne's studio and one from me. My name is Regina Farrell-Fagan. I'm the exhibitions manager at Clay Art Centre. If you don't know who we are a nationally recognised non-profit organisation for the ceramic arts located in Portchester, New York, which is a little over 20 miles north of New York City. We have a 60-year history with the ceramics art. And I'm going to hand it over to Hayne in a second. He's broadcasting tonight from our neighboring state in Connecticut. He's in Ivoryton. He is a self-taught, mostly self-taught ceramic artist who's very well known for his hand building techniques. We're very excited tonight. He's going to concentrate on the teapot, and I'm going to hand it over to you, Hayne. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So tonight, this will be sort of a truncated version of a teapot workshop. My teapot takes a better part of 3 hours, I've figured out, sort of from start to finish. So I thought what we might do is just sort of touch on some of the different parts of the teapot. We'll do the extruding for the handle, and then we'll talk about surface decoration for the body of the teapot, and then we'll put a couple of parts onto a halfway made teapot. So you'll get a good sense of what goes into a hand-built teapot. I came to hand building really because I was no good at throwing, and I think that a lot of people are initially drawn to clay, drawn to pottery, because they see somebody making something on the wheel and it just looks so wonderful, and then they actually sit at the wheel and they realize, this is not easy, and I think that turns a lot of people off pretty quickly. So, and I struggled with it for a long time until I really realized that I was just not a thrower. I was born to be a hand builder, and to me there's just so many more possibilities, and the horizon is very wide when it comes to hand building. So over here, where we are temporarily situated against one wall of my studio, is an extruder, a couple of extruders actually. There's this one, which is a 2.5 inch round barrel extruder. Back here is a 4-inch square barrel extruder. I use both of these a whole lot, and they do different things. Each of them does what they do the best, better than the other one does anyway. Because if I put an extruder die such as this would be a die that I would make coffee mug or a tumbler or a vase, a small vase from. And this die fits in this larger extruder. Obviously, it's not going to fit in the small extruder. But you might think that if I had a small die like this, which is what I'm going to use to make the handle, the teapot handle, you might think that, well, why do we need a small one when we've got a large one? Just put the small die in the large extruder. You could, but you'd have a hell of a time getting that quantity of clay through the relatively small opening in this die. So that's why you want to have a large extruder for your larger forms and a smaller one for your smaller forms. I'm going to drop this die into the top of the barrel here. And since it's being held in place by a flange at the bottom of the barrel, I have to sort of, hang on one sec, I'm going to readjust here so you can see a little bit better, I hope. I have to actually look in from below and see that it sort of positioned itself well, and good to go there. I'm going to grab some clay. The consistency of the clay can make a difference for a form like this, which is on the complicated side. You've probably seen some of my teapots before. They have a big curly Q. The whole thing kind of looks like I don't know, is it a treble clef? And it's got a lot of curls to it, and for that you kind of want clay to be a little on the stiff side. Otherwise, it's very hard to manage that form once it's out of the extruder. So this clay is still got a lot of flex in it, but it's a little on the stiff side. I actually took it out of the bag and let it sit out for a couple of hours this afternoon, let it stiffen up a little bit. So that drops in there. This plunger, that's the part that goes down in the barrel, and the handle here is what gives me the leverage to force the plunger down. And I don't know if you can see, there's these ratchets. It's just a series of bolts up here that the end of the handle hooks into. So what I'm going to do is make that large spiral curl first, and then I'm going to go back and bend it the other direction. Anytime you want to put a curve in an extrusion, it has to happen right as it's coming out. You can't try to do that later. It's just going to fold. So that was pretty quick, but you see how that form, it's kind of it's a question mark, basically. Sometimes the clay will want to curve all of its own for some mysterious reason that I haven't figured out. And if that's the case, that's good, because you want it to curve anyway, and you just sort of, as it's coming out, you can figure out which way it wants to go, and then just kind of keep urging it along in that same direction. So you can see how stiff this clay is. That was a little tight, actually, but you got to, you have to make a fair number of handles before you find the one that you're going to use. So that gives you an idea of what goes into extruding the handle. I've already extruded the hinge, which we'll also talk about as we put the teapot together. this is the die that made the hinge, and I hope you can see that. It's sort of a keyhole. It's a tube, a hollow tube with a flange coming off of one side of it. And here's the upside of it. So this little bent wire here is what's holding. This is actually just a nail. So that little piece in the very center there is the head of the nail. I'm making these with just some pretty rudimentary metalworking tools, a brazing torch, a metal saw, and various other things. Here is sort of a display of the other dies that I've made that go into the small extruder. So let's go back over here. This will give you a little bit of a view of the rest of my studio. But I wanted to show you handles that I had extruded earlier today and had set up so they're easier to work with. Sorry, I'm having to do this blind. So these are all handles that, you know, a couple of exceptions, but most of these would be good to go on a teapot. All right, let's go back over here to the workbench. Okay, good. So leaving aside the handle and the hinge for the moment, I want to talk about surface decoration on the slab that will form the teapot. And a lot of what I do involves stencils. So these are examples of some stencils that I've cut out of Tyvek. Tyvek is really wonderful stencil material. And it comes in at least two different forms, two different sources. This is the house wrap. It's a DuPont product. There's the NT of DuPont, and there's the V of Tyvek, I think. And you'll probably remember having driven by houses and buildings under construction. Before they put the siding up, they will wrap the whole structure in this stuff. They'll just staple it onto the studs, and it's a vapor barrier, which is why it's such great stencil material, because it's absolutely waterproof. But it's very thin, as you can see, and very easy to cut with any kind of an X-Acto type knife, you know, with a very sharp razor type blade in it. The other source for Tyvek are these envelopes. The Fedex envelopes are are the same thing. It's a little bit different. It's not quite as stiff as the house wrap Tyvek. You can tell that I've become a connoisseur of this particular material. The mailing envelope is a little softer, a little more flexible. I wouldn't say it's any thicker or thinner. I think it's just as easy to use. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't prefer one over the other. They both work quite well. The mailing envelopes are never all that, they're never much bigger than about this, which is for most stencils is a good size, but sometimes you might want to make a really good size stencil, in which case you probably want to go with the house wrap stuff, because you can get that in 3 foot wide rolls. So and they're 100 feet long or something. So you can really knock yourself out with a stencil at that size. So whatever your source for the material is, cutting it is, as I said, very easy. You want to work on a surface like this. This is what they call a self-healing mat. I think I think quilt makers or other folks who are cutting fabric a lot use these to cut on. And the reason that these are good for cutting Tyvek is that it provides a very smooth surface for your blade, but it's also not going to you're not gonna cut through the mat. It's also soft enough that it doesn't dull the blade of your knife all that quickly. It will eventually, but these are handy surfaces to use for cutting stencils. Show you a few other stencils that I've made. These are relatively small. These are not big enough for a teapot, really, but be able to do a mug or a cup or a small vase. Oh, here's some of my my skull mug imagery. Gearing up to do a show that opens in October, so I'm going to do some Dia de Muertos type imagery on those. So here's heart and crossbones. Some more skulls. There's some skulls there. Anyway, I have fun with those. Let's go to a slab. This teapot that we'll be putting together has a 2-color print on it, or it will. But here's a slab that I've rolled out. It's probably a little thicker than 1/8 of an inch. And you can see it's got quite a bit of flexibility to it, which is good. I wouldn't want it to be any softer than this, and I wouldn't want it to be much harder than that either. And I've already coated it with a green slip And then I'm going to lay this stencil. Get a sense of that stencil. And because this slab and the slip are still moist, if I press the Tyvek down into the surface of the slab with a rolling pin, it'll stick. And that will keep the second layer of slip from oozing under and messing up the pattern. So that's the green slip. Now I'm going to put a dark blue slip over that. Doesn't look blue now, but it will once it's fired. And Regina, if there are questions along the way, and you have the ability to relay them, I'd be happy to entertain questions as we go along.
I actually do have one here, which I'll read out. It's from Robin. And she said, what is the ideal way to roll out consistent slabs at home without a slab roller?
Ah, good question. Yeah, no, you don't need a slab roller. Early on in my career, I thought, well, I'm going to be a hand builder. I'm going to be working with a lot of slabs. I need a slab roller. And I went out and I bought a big Brent slab roller for, close to $2,000. I don't know that I would do that again. I do use it, and for large jobs, using a lot of slabs, it's great. But most of the time, well, you can see it right here. Most of the time, it looks like this, covered with other stuff, because I don't find that I use it all that often. Most of my slabs are made with wooden shims like these of various thicknesses and a rolling pin. This is a professional baker's rolling pin. I think it's 18 inches long, maybe even longer. And it's got some heft to it. This is a substantial piece of equipment. And strips of wood, you can find lots of places. If you can still find the old wooden yardsticks that used to be almost free at hardware stores, those are great shims. And the shim, all the shim does is give you a thickness between which to roll your rolling pin, and the thickness of the shim determines the thickness of the slab, right? And so over the years, I've collected various thicknesses of shim. This one is a little bit less than 1/4 of an inch. This one is a little bit less than that. And so by degrees, you can vary the thickness of your slabs to whatever you want. So, pretty basic tools, doesn't get much. This is called appropriate technology, I guess would be the word. Pretty basic tools, but they're really the way that I make the majority of my slabs. But I would recommend getting a a pretty good quality rolling pin.
Hayne, I'm going to read out another question here. This is from Margaret, and she said, do you roll out the slabs a day ahead or right before you use them?
Mostly it's right before I use them. Sometimes you will find that you want to let a slab set up a bit just to get a little bit stiffer, so it's not quite so soft, not quite so difficult to work with. So yeah, you could roll out a slab and just let it sit out for half an hour, however long it might take, depending, you know, on how warm it is or how humid it is. It always varies according to the weather. But slabs this thin, you have to sort of pay attention to, because it's easy for them to let them get too stiff too quickly. All right, so now I'm just going to paint the dark blue slip through the stencil. And I'm sort of going to go back and forth, a couple different directions to even out the coat. And the slip that I am using, as you can see, is pretty thick. I would need some more water in there to get that to a brushable stage, but the slip being as thick as it is means that I don't really have to worry too much. I don't have to sit around and wait for it to get dry before I pull the stencil. So that's right now, that slip that I just printed is still quite damp and soft, and I wouldn't want to start in on it right away. And if I wasn't able to do anything else with it, I would need to wrap it up and wait. But I don't want to put a piece of plastic down on top of this, because it's going to stick to the slip. I'm just going to lay a sheet of newsprint down first, very carefully. And then I can transfer it to a square board with some plastic under it.
Hayne, I have a question here about the stencils, that they look very delicate, and the question was, are they reused? Are they rinsed off afterwards for reuse, just as you finish working with them?
Right, yeah, they do look delicate, but these things are going to outlive all of us. I swear. This is Tyvek is remarkably tough stuff. I don't know what goes into it or how they make it, but it's just remarkably tough stuff. I would have a hard time tearing that. And because the material is waterproof, yeah, the slip is water-based slip, of course, and so I would just go and rinse this off under the tap. That's all you need to do. And where's my okay. I love to work on a turntable. It's just a way of moving the piece around without actually having to pick it up each time I want to. Then I make these out of a Lazy Susan bearing. That's what that is in the middle between these two pieces of plywood. And so for less than $10 at the hardware store, you can get the pieces to make a turntable. I have various sizes. I have a larger round one. Also, it's a larger size Lazy Susan. This one might actually be $12. Well worth it. So here's the teapot that I started with earlier today, and then I got to the point of putting the body together, putting the top and the bottom on, making the lid. And I did the same decoration here that I just showed you.
Hayne, would you mind talking a little bit about your joining, your seams?
Yeah. It depends a lot on what clay I'm using. I'm trying to find some. Here we go. This is what I'm using here is a white stoneware. These are just some scraps from the slab that I made this out of, and so that's the color of the clay without any slip on it, and it's very fine. It doesn't have any grog in it. And I find that joining it really doesn't even require joining slip. All you really need is water. So for instance, these two edges, which were the very ends of the slab that I made that out of, when I cut those ends, I did it at a bevel so that I could overlap that seam. You can see where the seam is. So when those two edges, when I cut those two edges, I did it at a bevel, and so I could overlap them, and that just makes for a stronger seam. So I've got these two edges here that are also beveled, of course, and I'll show you. Just gonna brush some water on one edge. I can join them together. And I'm going to use a fair amount of pressure. And another way to apply pressure is using a seam roller, drywall seam roller with a little roulette at the end. Also another hardware store item. And it just functions as a mini rolling pin, basically. So, you know, that's a connection that didn't involve any slip. It was just water and pressure, basically. But when I'm working with the other body that I use a lot is a brown stoneware, which has a little bit more tooth to it, and I find that what works best joining those pieces together is to use a joining slip, which is really nothing more than the clay body with some water mixed in. Nothing fancy or exotic in the joining slip.
Hayne, you sent us a document earlier that we're going to share with everybody, which it addresses the slip that you're using. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Right. These slips they all have the base is simply this clay body, this white stoneware with pigments, oxides, sometimes mason stains mixed in at various proportions, and it's very straightforward. The beauty of using the clay that you're working with as the base for your slip is that you know very well that you're not going to have any shrinkage problems, differential shrinkage, which I actually have never really noticed on other clays before. I've put porcelain slip right on dark stoneware and never really noticed a problem. I think a lot of times people make a bigger mystery out of slip than there really needs to be. So this is the slip that I was using painting on before. This is the sort of a soft green color, and what looks very dark gray or black here is going to be a dark sort of a muted dark blue, because it's got a lot of cobalt in it. So first thing I want to do is the hinge. And so this is the extrusion that came out of the die that I showed you earlier, the little keyhole looking thing. And that I need a couple of other tools. We've got a few different very small sections of dowel of various sizes, various diameters. And I just need to find the one that fits snugly in that hole. And it's a little too snug, I think. I'll show you a finished teapot so you get a better sense of that. This is an example of the other stoneware body that I use. Is a brown stoneware, darker stoneware. That's the unglazed color of this particular body. So here's the hinge. So it's actually one extrusion, but it's cut into 3 sections. And that middle section gets attached to the lid, and then the 2 other parts get attached to the top of the teapot. So I'm going to cut. If it's not too disorienting, I want to switch cameras because I think I can get a better close-up on this camera. Does that work, Regina?
Yep, that works really well.
So I want to first cut this to length, something about there, maybe. Because that's going to run across there. The 2 outer parts will attach here, and then the middle part will attach to the lid. It might be a little on the long side. Let's turn that down a bit. That looks good. So now I need to cut. I actually need to make 2 cuts in this. And the 2 cuts have to be as close to parallel as I can get them, because that's what's going to be the hinge. If those 2 cuts, are not parallel, the hinge is not going to want to move very easily, and it might even get stuck on itself. And you really don't want that to happen. So I take a tool like this that's got 2 blades glued onto a piece of wood, and they're parallel within reason. So I want to try to, and you just have to eyeball this, try to get that as, first of all, you want it to be perpendicular to the direction, the axis. And then you want to start that cut and then just go all the way around. And hopefully you'll end up in the same groove that you started. And then, all right, so there's your hinge.
Hayne, if you don't mind, I'm going to throw a couple of questions at you as you work.
Yep.
do you have any tips for the location of the handles, the spouts, the hinge? You know, do you stay away from the seam? Are you very intentional about where you put them?
Well, the handle almost always goes on the side where the seam is, right? This back side, what I would call the back side, that's where the seam is. That seems like a logical place to put the handle. And in terms of placement, I don't know that I don't know that there's a lot there's nothing magical about it. To me, just visually having a handle that is fairly high on the piece is more visually pleasing to me, and the same with the spout. And the spout, of course, you have a practical matter. You want the spout to be, you want the lowest part of the spout to be above the highest part of where your tea is gonna rise to, obviously. But other than that, I think you're pretty. You've got free reign to put it pretty much wherever you want. These teapots have a sort of a formal basis in actually some very old colonial type teapots that were made, you know, in this area in Connecticut, New York, Massachusetts, in the 16 and 1700s. It's obviously a fairly updated version of those, but if you look back at some of those forms, a lot of them had this kind of a scroll type handle and that spout that had a little bit of a recurve to it. So now it's just going to be a matter of trimming. Trimming the ends of the various parts of the hinge. But I do want to say that as soon as I get through putting this hinge on, I'm going to reveal a little trick that a way of making a hinge where you don't have to have an extruder. If that puts anybody's mind at ease. There's a way to do it that doesn't involve all this stuff. I just like to make things complicated. I'm just marking the spots where the hinge is going to get attached. My scoring tool, some little finishing nails set into the end of a piece of bamboo. This was actually the handle of a wok spatula that broke off one night when I was being a little bit over enthusiastic with my stir fry. So joining slip, sorry, yes?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to ask you a question about the hinges being unglazed, that you seem to leave them unglazed a lot.
Yes. Right.
The
In
functional
this
element.
case, where I've got glaze on the entire outside of a teapot, obviously you don't want the glaze anywhere near the working part of the hinge, because that's gonna seal it up right quick. But that's really the only, and I just put wax on those areas to keep the glaze off. With this, I'm not going to put any glaze on it at all. There's not going to be any glaze on the outside of this teapot. The color in the slip is going to be the entire decoration for this piece. So I don't have to worry about that at all on this piece. And for joining slip, got a clog here. I mix up my slip and I put it in these mustard and ketchup bottles, just as a way of sort of for ease of application. And it's an easy way of sort of, I can get it right where I want it. All right, so that's pretty well attached. Now I got to ease the dowel out. It would be lovely if I could leave the dowel in as it dries, and hopefully that would help it maintain the alignment. But of course, the problem is that clay is going to shrink, and the dowel is snug enough that if the clay shrank at all, it would break around the dowel. So I can't leave that dowel in place. That looks pretty good. Let's quick put the handle on. So there's the handle. About like that.
How leather hard are your pieces, Hayne, when you're joining them on?
Yeah, this one I actually is a little bit stiffer than I would normally use. Normally I would want it to be not quite leather hard. It would be nice to have some flexibility. But I was kind of not paying attention. I had a few other things going on, like I'm going to do all the other things to get ready for this evening. Anyway, I didn't catch this in time, and so it got a little bit stiffer than I would like, but it'll be fine. It's going to go.
So you're making some adjustments there to make it fit in very snug.
Yeah. There's a pretty good surface, connecting surface on this lower part. Up here, I'm joining a corner to a corner, basically. Doesn't give me a whole lot of surface to work with as far as connection goes. So I have to be pretty careful about how I do that top join, although I feel quite confident that there's enough connection on the bottom. I don't have to worry too much. It hasn't been a problem anyway.
And because you're using the same clay and the slip is the same clay body, your shrinkage rate is the same.
Yeah, and I think that the slip is a pretty thin coat. So even if the shrinkage rate were somehow different, I'm not sure it would really matter all that much, just because it's such a thin application of the slip. And I suppose if I really wanted to play it safe, I would take another piece of clay and just give it a little bit of support as it dries. All right, so let's find the spout. Here we go. Yes, good.
Can I take you off topic just briefly, Hayne? The question here about the body of the teapot itself and the shape, the elliptical shape that it has. How did you come about that shape? How do you, is it simply that you roll it, or do you roll it around something and then remove it?
Oh, right. Yeah, I would normally take the length of that slab and then roll it around a cardboard tube. This is handy because the two ends I can then press against this, and when I'm sealing those two edges, and the tube gives me something to apply pressure against when I'm sealing those edges. And the oval was really taken again from those early silver and pewter and probably sometimes tin teapot, coffee pot forms from several hundred years ago. A lot of them had oval bodies. I don't know why. I don't know if there was a practical consideration for that, or if it was simply all aesthetic. Would be. I don't know enough about the history of the making of those forms to be able to tell you. That's kind of where the oval came from. So this little gentle curve in the spout, you know, starts with this, and then it's just a matter of cutting it at the angle that looks right, like that. Curve that cut to fit the curvature of the body. And then just a matter of kind of playing around and seeing, well, that's a little bit too upward pointing as far as I'm concerned. Need to do a little trimming, clean up those lines a bit. Smooth those corners down. I'm going to readjust that angle, point it down a little bit more. Maybe go a little bit farther down than that. And one thing about teapots, and well, really just about any form really, is that you learn a lot, I think, when you're working with a particular form. You really learn a lot by making a number of them at once. So, for instance, this is an unusual case that I'm just making one teapot here. If next time I sit down to make teapots, I'll probably make anywhere between 8 and 12 at a time. Just because working from one to the next, you start to get ideas, and you start to see things developing, and you might do something on one that you weren't really paying close attention to, and maybe it's a good surprise, maybe it's not a good surprise, but you can really start to evaluate one form compared with the next one. Looking at one piece all on its own, I think it's hard to sort of get a sense for how you might feel about it. But when you have it up against several other pieces, then you can start to go, oh, okay, I like that one a lot, or I like this particular thing about that one a lot. And so by going through that exercise, you know, by the time you hit your third or fourth one, you're kind of in the groove, and you're able to work off of ideas that you might not have come to if you were just working on one piece at a time. Plus, at the end, you end up with a whole lot of teapots, and that's always a good thing.
And I have a couple of questions here. Whenever you're ready, I'm just going to let you know
Yep.
that they've been asked about the hinge if you don't have the extruder piece to make that piece, and also about making the dies for the extruder as well.
Yeah, right. Sorry, I did promise an extruderless hinge, and I got distracted by the spout. Once I'm gonna put the spout on real quick, and then I will go back and talk about the other hinge. So scoring both of those edges. And there's a really nifty tool that I've come across, one of the few that I actually didn't make myself. This is it would be hard to see. It's a hole cutter. It looks pretty lethal, and it is quite sharp. But it's got this tapered, curved blade, which is really pretty cool, because what you can do is by pushing it in a little bit, you make a little hole, or pushing it in a little bit further, you can make a little bit bigger hole, or a really big hole. You know, if you can do that with one tool, that's a pretty good trick. So this is a Bill Van Gilder tool. I like it a lot. Bill makes some pretty good tool sets. If you're in the market for some new tools, check him out. So what I'm going to do with my Bill Van Gilder hole maker is right in there. Now, what you can't see is that on the inside, as I'm doing this, because I'm pushing the clay in order to cut out, to take the plug of clay out, I'm actually creating a pretty rough burr on the inside of each one of those holes. So I have to remember to knock all that stuff off once the piece is bisqued. I can go in from the top with a little tool and just clean off all the raggedy stuff that's on the inside of the holes. It just makes for a little bit cleaner spout. And sometimes I get one of these little plugs stuck in there. All right, let's get this spout on. And so the very last thing that I will do, but not right now, is to put the knob on top of the lid. But I can see it's already 20 after, and I don't know what people have for bedtimes, but I think I might be might have to hurry things along a little bit, so that I'm not gonna put the knob on the lid right now. I'll do that later. So that's basically the teapot. All right, the hinge that doesn't need an extruder, I'm going to cannibalize some clay from this spout. The hinge is really just it's just a tube with a flange. There's the flange, there's the tube. So if you can take a fairly thin slab, just rolling out a very thin slab, cut it into a bit of a rectangle. And then all you need is a round piece of wood, a dowel. I'll use this same little piece of dowel that I used before. Take your slab and your dowel and just wrap the slab around the dowel. This slab is gotten to the point where it's a little bit too dry and it's sort of starting to crack. Let's see if I can find other things better. It's starting to crack too. Never fear, I have another slab waiting in the wings. Let's try this one. The same thing. I'm just rolling the slab. I'm getting a little bit of surface cracking. That's rolling the slab around the dowel. And then all I need to do is attach that end to the other piece, to the other side of it there, right? And again, I can just use water for that. With this particular clay anyway. So I'm gonna brush a little water into that seam. And then just kind of compress it. And that's what I would do when first few times I was doing it this way. That's what I do. And then I discovered that, you know what, it'd be better even if I could then take another piece of clay and kind of reinforce. I want to reinforce this piece here, which is the flange, basically, right? So if I just dampen that bit, and then I can slide this other piece of clay in there and give it a good, wiggle it back and forth, press it pretty well, trim those ends. And that will do you quite nicely for a hinge. you'll still need to put together two blades on a piece of wood like this in order to do that cut that I showed you. But this way you don't need an extruder. Okay.
Thank you, Hayne. Quick question for you here with the handle. Do you put a hole in the handle, seeing as it's hollow, to let the air out?
Yeah, good question. And for years and years and years, I was making coffee mugs, for instance. I'll show you one. And with the same thing. This is an extruded hollow handle, and you can sort of see that I've bent it, and it kind of looks like a crimped garden hose, which is really kind of the look that I was after here. But it's hollow, and these two ends are sealed against the side of the mug, right? So for years, I would be putting a hole, and take my needle tool and put a hole right under the handle, someplace inconspicuous, to let the air out, and that's what would happen. And I discovered it's a long story. I discovered that I don't need to do that. If I didn't put a hole in the handle, nothing would happen. Everything would be fine. And I'm not really sure why, but I think the expanding air, I think it's a myth. I mean, obviously air expands, but I think that it's a myth that expanding air causes explosions. We know for sure that that water, expanding steam, usually in the bisque fire, that does cause explosions. But air, I think, almost never causes an explosion. Ever since I discovered that I don't need to put holes in the hollow handles, I haven't, and I've never had an exploding handle. So it's kind of, I love it when these, these sort of tried and true, these tropes that we all grow up with in clay anyway. Don't ever do this, or always do this. Sometimes they're not quite really true, and sometimes it just takes going, well, let's try it, let's see what happens. And sometimes you can get away with stuff that way.
A bit mind blown with that. that was really good tip to share.
So it's almost 8:30. I have one other thing that I wanted to show, if you think there might be time. It's actually not going to take very long.
Yep, go ahead.
If people are up for it. Another decorative technique that I use a lot is the stretched slab. And here's a white stoneware slab that I've coated with black slip. This side I've coated with black slip. And I've taken a tool that I made. This is a series of straight razor blades. Hard to see, but I've glued them all together with little strips of wooden veneer in between them to separate them. They're probably 1 millimeter or 2 apart. And I am just going to complete what I started before here, and I'm just cutting fairly shallow slits into the surface, just enough to cut through the slit. And I can expand this slab by throwing it against the surface. And those little razor cuts will start to open up and reveal the pattern. You don't see much first few times, but all of a sudden then, if you can see, those little cuts are starting to open up. And keep going and sort of paying attention to which way the pattern is going. You don't have a whole lot of control, but you can sort of direct things. You see things starting to open up a little bit more. And it can be pretty surprising what pattern gets revealed. And you have to keep an eye on it. You don't want to stretch it so thin that it starts to come apart, but that gives you a sense for what kind of pattern you can get out of that. I have a piece that I did earlier today, and then I used a rolling pin to flatten it more, and it kind of reveals the pattern a little bit better, I think. Show you that here. Anyway, you can do it's. I've used this for teapots. I've used it for just about every form I make, and it's really a fun technique to work with, because it just has so many different outcomes. So that's kind of the end of my list. But was there a question that I didn't get to when we were talking about the hinge? Do you have any more questions on your?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Quite a few, but we'll try and group them together.
Okay.
When the hinge is finished, I know that you mentioned to me before that I think you said you put a nail inside that you got at the hardware store, a copper one, was it?
Right. So the I need to zip into the other room real quickly and get something. I'll be right back. So the diagram that I sent, which Regina will send to you all, gives you kind of an idea of how this works. But I wanted to show you the pieces in real life. So inside, we can use our non-extruded hinge as an example. All right, so here's the hinge in three pieces, right? Here's two brass tubes. You can get these at like a hobby store. I think people who make model airplanes use these, and you can get them in practically any size. These are just short little pieces that they come in, I think 18-inch lengths or maybe longer. They come in brass. There's some copper in here. There's some aluminum. It kind of doesn't matter. Sometimes I like the brass. I think the brass is a little bit tougher, but it really doesn't matter. They all work. And the beauty of it is that they've sized these tubes so that one tube slips very snugly inside the other tube. Hard to see because these are the same color. Let's see if I can find. So for instance, here's an aluminum tube and here's a brass tube. But they fit inside each other. They're called telescoping tubes. They act like a telescope. And because they are so snug, they make the perfect hinge pin. So this is a good example. Here is a shorter piece, this one in the middle that I'm sliding back and forth. And then this longer piece is slightly smaller so that it fits inside this one, right? So the larger piece goes in this middle part of the hinge, gets glued in there. I glue it in with some super glue. It's glued in there. And then this other tube slips right through inside and then gets glued into the ends, these other ends of the other two ends of the hinge. That way. So just I stuff each end with some epoxy putty. So that's the end, and you don't see the putty really because to my eye, the putty is a sort of ugly gray color, and so I've cut the head off of a bronze nail, like a marine boat deck nail. Just cut the head off, and then I stuff it in there before the epoxy putty is dry, and it covers up the putty, and to me it just gives a nice kind of a finish to it. So that was the nail part that you were remembering, Regina. But the nail is entirely cosmetic. It's these two brass tubes inside that you can't see that are really doing the hinge. So that's why the hinge is a fairly smooth back and forth. There's not a lot of rattle back and forth. So that's sort of the guts of the hinge. And when you look at the drawing, the diagram that I sent out, I think the diagram is sort of a transparent view of the hinge and the brass tubes. I think you'll get a much better sense of how it works when you look at that. And you need a few specialized tools. You'll probably need a jeweler's saw in order to cut the brass. That's really not a huge expense. If you're like me, you'll jump at the chance to buy a new tool. And I encourage everybody to investigate the hinge, and if you run into any difficulties, please give me send me an email or something, and we can work you through it.
I just sent everybody the documents
Okay, great.
on the hinge and on the slips, the ones that you
Good.
sent me earlier. So
Okay.
everyone should have that in their email. I'm just going to ask you one more question and then we'll let you go. When you're recycling your clay, do you scrape off the slip before you recycle, or how do you handle that?
Well, all right. So here I have to make a guilty guilty confession. I don't recycle my clay. And here's the thing. By the time my scrap, is by the time I've got all this scrap, it's way too hard. It's dried out enough that I really can't wedge this back into usable clay. So I would have to chuck it into a bucket, slake it down, let it sit for however many days or weeks it would take, run it through a pug mill, and all of that takes time and effort and expense. Pug mills are really expensive. And to me, clay is relatively, of all of the things that we use in the pottery studio, clay is about the cheapest thing we work with. And I know that I am not utilizing a resource to the extent that it probably should be. But for me, time is way more valuable than clay. So and early on, I tried to get rid of it. I called up the local elementary school art teacher and to see if she wanted my cast off clay. No, for the same reason I don't want it. It's a pain. It takes a lot of work to get it usable again. So it ends up in the landfill. But I kind of figure that clay is about the most benign thing you can put into a landfill. That's what happens to my scrap. And that's other people have other solutions to that problem, but at least for the way I work, and the fact that I think that time is better spent doing more creative things. That was the solution I came up with. I'm not saying that everybody should do it that way, but I'm just saying that's how I chose to live my time in the studio. Forget about recycling. You've got better things to do with that time, I think. If somebody had a better solution, I'm all ears.
Thank you so much, Hayne. We're getting loads of comments here thanking you for just a great demo and so much useful information. People are very impressed with your handmade tools and how you've adapted in the studio to solve your own problems. I think that was great for people to see. And, I think we could possibly have you back again for another demo because you've got so much knowledge to pass on to everybody else. But thank you very much. And thanks to everybody for attending tonight. And we'll see you back here again.
Good.
Have a good night. Thank you, Hayne.
Let's do it again. Thanks a lot, Regina.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.